Be invited to Madison, Wisconsin, one of my favorite places, especially to close such a distinguished conference as you've had today. As your third keynote speaker of the day, I fear I should offer up at the beginning that I have the most modest expectations for myself compared to the head of the National Renewable Energy Lab and the really wonderful talk we had at lunch from Carl Robago. Both really remarkable people and heroes of mine. But there are other heroes in the room. There are a lot of great leaders and giants in Wisconsin that have taken you along this path toward a clean energy future, and many of those are people I look up to. It was very nice to see, recognize today Lee Cullen at lunch, really prodigious accomplishments that he's made. And you, Don, in your life of public service here in Wisconsin, and Michael Vickerman, founder and visionary that helped get this organization. And I look to you, Tyler, as the next generation of leaders that's going to take Wisconsin where we're going. So with that kind of introduction, I think I'll tell you a brief amusing story. My very first visit to Madison, I was 17 years old, and it was the first time my parents let me out of state without supervision. And I was on my way from Chicago, Illinois to Minnesota to look at the college that I eventually attended, Carleton College in Northfield, Minnesota. And my friends and I, who were exploring colleges, we decided on a January day when we got to Madison, because it was 20 below zero, we didn't call it cold vortex back then, we just called it winter. Because it was 20 below zero, we decided to put the top down on the Chrysler New Yorker and drive around the Capitol in a circle with the radio turned up really loud and wear sunglasses. We thought that would be an appropriate thing for downtown Madison. Am I right? That's about right for downtown Madison. So, 1977 was when I graduated from Carleton College. And I began my work in the energy field 2 years later, training as an energy auditor for, I think, $4.90 an hour on a federal program to teach people skills, which Carleton College hadn't managed to give me marketable skills with a history degree. And I've basically made my living in the energy field since 1979. So my job today is to close up this program, touch on some of the key points that have been made, hopefully tell a good story, bring some insights that might be useful to Wisconsin from Minnesota as a model. I loved that Lee at lunch said that he named his daughter Hope. I hope to bring a little bit of hope and not have you go away and say, oh yeah, that was a great story, but that's just Minnesota. We really are the same people culturally and historically. We began all as Swedes and Germans and Norwegians, and now it's getting mercifully quite more diverse. But the idea that, oh, that's just Minnesota, I want to completely dispel from the room. We had an election 3 years ago, and the very, very liberal Democrat beat the very, very conservative Republican by, I think, about 8,000 votes. So we are as purple as you are. It's a very competitive state. So don't say, oh, the liberals in Minnesota can do this, and it's not possible here in Wisconsin. The other things I'm assigned to do is to not gloss over the tough story you have here in Wisconsin right now. But I think I can dispense with that because Joe Sullivan took care of that pretty thoroughly this morning by quoting at length from all the wind developers who absolutely will not come to Wisconsin because the business climate is so bad for renewable energy. I was both pleased that I didn't have to point that out and somewhat embarrassed to see all those verbatim quotes about how bad it is a business climate to do business here in Wisconsin if you're a renewable energy developer. So as bad as things are, not to gloss over any of that, I'm the rah-rah end of the program, and I know that I'm the thing that stands between you and social hour. So with that, Do I have the button, don't I? I have a black one because I thought maybe I would be doing some talking during that period. In fact, when I sent the slides to Tyler, he says, about 6 of them are black. And I said, that's because I hate slides. So I just put black ones in from time to time. So I'm going to talk a little bit about 20-year history of, I'm going to just talk about 2 technologies. That's what the black one's for. I'm just going to talk about 2 technologies. I mean, we heard today from Dan how do you say his name? Arvizu, Dan Arvizu from NREL, about myriad technologies, really an encyclopedic understanding of the landscape of clean energy tech. Really an incredible visionary. We also, I thought, had a very impressive presentation from both Melissa Van Ornum, and you guys are way, 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 way ahead of us on biogas, biopower. Let's just call it cow power because the public will understand what we're talking about. You're way ahead of us. If we could learn 10% of what you figured out about that, that would be a big contribution. But I'm not going to talk about either of those things. I'm just going to talk about wind power, and I'm going to talk about solar power. So that's all I'm going to talk about, is wind power and solar power. And that doesn't mean I think those are the only things that are interesting. I think electric vehicles are interesting. I think that combined heat and power is interesting. I think industrial cogeneration is interesting. I think buildings that are net zero is interesting. I'm just going to talk about wind power and solar power, though. So I'm going to give you a 20-year overview of what we've accomplished in wind power, and then I'm going to give you an overview of what we accomplished in solar power in 20 weeks. Okay? Now that's the nut of my presentation. So what we accomplished in wind power over 20 years, in 1994, which was near the beginning of the time when I was working on public policy all day, every day, we had the nation's first major wind power obligation of an electric utility in 1994. The American Wind Energy Association had its annual meeting. Speaking of giants in the room, John Dunlop from American Wind Energy Association was formerly our chairman of our board. They had their annual meeting in Minneapolis in the summer of 1994 after this renewable energy requirement was passed on to Xcel Energy in a very, very difficult, contentious legislative session that someone will someday write a history book about this legislative session. And I remember the president of Xcel came to the American Wind Energy Association and spoke, and you expect he'd say, hey, we could all work together, it's going to be great. He said, 20 years from now, nuclear power and coal power will be the twin engines of this company. I'm like, oh God, why did they invite it? Now, Xcel Energy today understands that wind power is one of the very, very big drivers of its economic future, but at the time it wasn't clear at all. 400 megawatts was about $1 billion worth of wind power in 1994, and we were clever enough to slip into the law just one sentence. I remember lobbying just one member. Sometimes legislation is beautiful. Just one member can get one little sentence. This guy looked smiling. We inserted a sentence in the law that said they had to do 400 megawatts of wind power, but if it turned out to be cost effective, the Public Utilities Commission could order it to be 800. So then we won a case in front of the Public Utilities Commission in 1999, not saying that it was cost effective in 1999, saying it was going to be cost effective within the 15-year resource plan that they were adopting. We persuaded the Minnesota Public Utilities Commission that from 1999 to 2014, over that period of time, wind power would become cost effective and should be ordered. And now Xcel Energy had 800 megawatts of wind power to do. This really is the birth of the wind industry in America, I'll tell you that. Because the Jerry Brown wind industry of the 1970s was a different wind industry. You know, it was based on massive public subsidies and bad technology, to be frank with you. So the wind industry was born on the Buffalo Ridge in Minnesota, copied from the Danes. The Danes had the industry and the Minnesotans imported it, and Xcel Energy drove the deal with the 1994 Prairie Island legislation. So we too, like you, try to get minimum standards in state law, and look how long, from 1994 to 2007, it took us. And we worked on it the whole time. And in 2001, we got a law, I like to call it the try very, very hard law. We had Republican control of the House, and we couldn't get a requirement passed. So we got an objective. It's an objective that you reach 10% wind power in Minnesota. And the Public Utilities Commission will determine whether you made a good faith effort. And if you didn't make a good faith effort, there could be consequences in your rate cases. So actually, all the electric utilities did it because it was just too risky to not. So the try very, very hard law actually was a pretty damn good law because the utilities read it as, we got to do this. So we didn't have the political power in 2001 to get a requirement, but we had the political power to get a try very, very hard law. And then that grew the industry really quite quickly. I remember my staff asking me in the beginning of 2004, are you kidding me? When I told them that we were going to have our top legislative issue in 2004 to be a 20% renewable energy standard. They said, we could never win that. I said, well, we got 80% of the public with us. They said, yeah, but we lost last year on a 10% requirement, or 2 years ago on a 10% requirement. So we worked 2004, 2005, 2006, and by the spring of 2007, or January 2007, because we had an election that intervened, everybody in politics was in favor of a renewable energy standard, when previously, the previous year, we weren't able to get a vote in a committee. So the idea that this is politically impossible, when you see the data that 80% of the public is with you, don't be shy about calling for a renewable energy standard. Don't be shy about calling for that. And then, Mike Bull has already highlighted what this essentially was, but it was in 2007, I think 193 out of 201 legislators voted for it. I think there were like 12 people that voted no. And it created a market of about a $10 billion wind energy market. You know, it was a renewable energy standard, but it was almost all going to be met by wind power, large-scale wind power. But now what's happened since that time is wind power has become, I like to refer to it as a least cost resource. Not the least cost resource, but a least cost resource. It's the cheapest way to get power now. And the idea that we can't do wind power in Wisconsin because it's too expensive, that is folly. And everybody in this room knows that. That is totally not true that wind power is too expensive. And I'm going to give you some detail here. I happen to, we have 23,500 megawatts in the MISO region that's required by law under various renewable energy standards of various states. And you saw that this morning from Joe Sullivan, that Wisconsin is surrounded by states that have 2 times, 3 times, 4 times, 5 times, 6 times, 8 times more wind energy than Wisconsin does. But that isn't causing rates in all those states to go up. That's causing rates in those states to be stable. And Joe made this point really clearly. This is a fuel source, this is an energy source that has no fuel involved. That's a good thing for conservatives to think about, that there is no price risk. Where else can you sign a contract and know what the price of power is going to be in 20 years? What other deal can you get? It is the most conservative thing to do, to lock in a low price for 20 years. So that's what wind power is offering now, politically, is the ability to lock in prices for 20 years at low prices. That was not possible. In the entire 20 years we worked on that, that was not possible. And now, for Wisconsin, it is possible. Just last year, 2013, Xcel Energy, actually they corrected me on this number. I said 1,898 megawatts. It's actually 1,918 megawatts. I was off by 20 megawatts. I don't know where I lost track of it. But that was all the wind power Xcel Energy bought in 3 states, in Colorado, in Texas, and 4 Minnesota. Some of it was developed in North Dakota, South Dakota, but 4 Minnesota. None of that was driven, this is a true statement, none of that was driven by mandates. None of that was driven by renewable energy standards. None of that was driven by state law. It was all driven by economics. It's cheaper. And so I asked, I said, would it be fair to say publicly that this was more or less, all this wind power, you got it around 3 cents a kilowatt hour? And I got back from Xcel Energy, quite a bit below 3 cents a kilowatt hour.
Wow.
That's what he put in writing. It was like 2.5 cents a kilowatt hour. These are strangely not numbers we're supposed to be able to know, but everybody figures them out. Okay, so I'm not going to say it out loud. 2,000 megawatts of wind power at maybe $2,000 a megawatt, a kilowatt. I always get it wrong. This is like, what is this, like a $4 billion commitment. It's a $4 billion capital commitment. It's like $3.5, $4 billion capital commitment. At 2.5 cents a kilowatt hour for 20 years? Really? Xcel Energy bet $4 billion last year to buy 20-year power at 2.5 cents a kilowatt hour? Let's get more of that, huh? So that's why the Minnesota legislature is looking at studies of how to integrate 40%, 50%, 60%, 70%, 80%. And our idealistic chairman of the Energy Committee in the Senate wants 100% renewable energy in Minnesota and be the first state in the union to have no fossil fuels. And we're studying that right now in the state. Okay? So that's the wind power story. Now I'm going to tell you a solar power story. It's going to be as good or better. And it's not going to take 20 years. The solar power story is going to be as good or better than the wind power story, and it's going to happen faster. Let me give you a few more points about the wind power story. Joe said this morning, but I don't think he emphasized it enough. Joe is a great ally from Wind on the Wires. I served on the board with Michael Vickerman for almost a decade. I just stepped down this year. Wind on the Wires works regionally on grid and transmission issues. And I just want to push this out fairly forcefully. If there are voices in the rooms that think we don't need any clean energy transmission because we're going to do local power, we're going to do community-based power, we're going to do solar power, I want to dissuade you from that view. And here's the most compelling reason why. The more clean energy transmission we have, the more interconnected we are between Nebraska and Chicago, between Fargo and Madison, the more interconnected the grid is. Every $100 million or $500 million or $1 billion worth of wind power that goes online anywhere in the region suppresses all the prices of all the coal plants. Wind power and clean energy transmission is the coal plant killer. The coal plant economics are degrading because we add wind power to the mix. And so to say, hey, I'm not for clean energy transmission because I want to have solar power in Madison is the wrong strategy. There are two halves of a walnut that fit together. Distributed power and clean energy transmission are two halves of a walnut that fit together. And Wisconsin is going to be hugely benefited by a strong regional interconnected grid. So the crashing of coal plant economics is the most important game changer that nobody's mentioned today. Coal plant economics are going off the end of the table, and they're not going to get better. The price of coal is going up. The rates are going up. The carbon noose is tightening. But I don't think anybody mentioned global warming at all today. But I'll make a fairly blunt comment. In 100 years of technology innovation, an electrical engineering society said the electric grid was the single most brilliant invention. I agree with that statement. The electrical grid is the single most brilliant invention in 100 years of technology innovation. And wouldn't it be so much more awesome if it wasn't destroying the planet? That's going to be the only global warming comment today. The other thing I want to say, the last thing I'll say about wind power before I go on to solar energy, is the turbines that we're putting up today are not the turbines that Minnesota put up over the last 15 years. They're way more awesome. They're way, way, way better. They capture way more power at a way lower price at way like a $4 billion investment at 2.5 cents a kilowatt hour, because the turbines are so much better. That's actually a cool thing for Wisconsin to think about, is you only have 600 megawatts of the old-fashioned turbines. Right? We have turbines built in 1994. We're talking about taking them down. Am I wrong? They're pretty inefficient. Okay. Now I realize it's between you and cocktails. I gave this talk, and I think this talk Tyler saw online. Somebody joked about YouTube watching middle of the night. You can see me talk about solar power, and this is the title of my talk, my solar power talk, is Solar Power is Inevitable. I'm not going to give the whole talk. I'll give you a very, very, very brief version of the talk. There's a lot of solar power. Unlike wind power, solar power is economically possible wherever plants grow. That's a lot of places. I think plants grow almost everywhere in Wisconsin. We don't have any tundra here, do we? No deserts, right? So anywhere that plants can grow, solar power is economically possible. The running costs make wind power look... I can't think of the word. The reason the running costs are so low is there are no moving parts. The PhD head of the NREL was leaving, and I asked him the question as he was leaving, what would be the most game-changing thing that could happen in renewable energy? He said, oh, I guess if solar power could be printed as fast as we print newspaper, that would be pretty game-changing. If solar panels could be printed as fast as we print newspaper. And I said, really? He said, yeah, oh yeah. The whole business of a solar panel just happens within a few molecules of thickness. The rest of it is just extra. Okay, well that's interesting. And the other thing is that there is no technology to generate electricity that's as reliable. That's why solar power was invented, to send people to outer space. With Carl's joke today is, Neil Armstrong did not say, I hope that the lowest bidder didn't win this thing. But when we got started on this stuff, actually interesting, I love this chart, because that is the year I graduated from Carleton College, up on the left, 1977. And to send solar panels into outer space costs $75.67 a watt.
Wow.
That's what it cost to send solar panels into outer space, because the alternative was a unreasonably long extension cord. Right? Well, solar panels today cost 75 cents a watt. That means during my career, I'm not that old, during my career, during my professional career in energy, solar panels have dropped 99%. Haven't dropped 40%, haven't dropped by a third, they've dropped 99%. But what's more interesting than that is what's happened in the last 5 years. They've dropped 80% since 2008, and they've dropped 60% since 2011. This is a most interesting chart. These are all the world's most sophisticated technology assessment companies. I'll read their names: Barclays, Citigroup, Deutsche Bank, Goldman Sachs, Lazard, Stifel, Thomas Weissel, UBS. And they each have between 2 and 3 different cost estimates for what was going on with the solar panel market. And what's amazing about the estimates is every year's estimate, the red line is all the estimates made in 2008, the yellow line is all the estimates made in 2009, then all the estimates made in 2010. What's amazing about it is none of the lines actually overlap. You see what I'm saying? They were so wrong when they estimated in 2009 what the panels would be in 2010, that the net estimates dropped down. So this is the price of solar panels falling 80% over 5 years to 75 cents today. Y'all thinking about this? Mm-hmm. Maybe y'all knew this. Okay, I'm going to wrap up by saying that I've said this. I said that there's game changer things happening here that doesn't have anything to do with the environment and doesn't have anything to do with public preferences. It has to do with business. You know, I love that you name your conference "We Mean Business." Renewable energy in Wisconsin means business. Renewable energy in Wisconsin means business. Renewable energy in Wisconsin means business. Renewable energy in Wisconsin just doesn't mean business for the renewable energy producers. Renewable energy in Wisconsin means business to the largest corporations headquartered in Wisconsin. Got that? Because if you don't have renewable energy, you aren't going to be globally competitive.
That's right.
You are going to be losers.
Right.
In the world competition for market share, you're going to be in a state that's going higher and higher and higher in your electricity rates, and all the surrounding states are going to go flat or lower. Iowa, Minnesota, Illinois, Michigan, they will all leave you behind competitively. So that's the one wrinkle I want to give you on renewable energy in Wisconsin. It means business. Think that it means business for all business. I love that Michael Bull talked about utility 2.0, because that's what's going to be required, is that we recognize that what's happening with solar energy and wind power, these are hugely disruptive forces, the fact that it's cheaper than business as usual. And what happened in wind power over a 20-year period is going to happen in solar power over a 5-year period. Solar power will be cheaper than any other way to make electricity in Wisconsin within a decade. Solar energy will be cheaper than any other way to make electricity in Wisconsin within a decade. And no other state has a competitive advantage over you in solar power. We've already talked about how it's windier in Iowa and it's windier in South Dakota, and, you know, admittedly it's a little windier in Minnesota, but it ain't sunnier. There's no competitive advantage anybody has over you in solar power. So this idea of transforming the electric industry and transforming the electric grid and transforming the way they do business, it's a wicked problem. Let's not be cute about it. Let's not be triumphant about it. Let's not be glib. This is a very difficult problem, because at the exact same time that we're completely transforming the electric system, we got to maintain that thing that the engineers called the most amazing invention in the 20th century. We have to match up supply and demand, not day by day, not hour by hour, but second by second. We have to have the identical supply to the identical demand, second by second, you know, until we bring on more storage at least. And even then, the storage will be providing that demand. But what's going to happen is the revolution that we saw in telecommunications, the revolution that we saw in IT systems, the revolution we saw in technology across the board is coming to the electric industry, and that's a good thing. But I'm not part of the crowd that says, out with the electric companies, in with the new. I believe, and I've said this publicly in front of Xcel Energy CEO, I believe that every major industrial economy is going to want a strong electric utility. You may not believe that, I believe that. A strong electric utility is going to be part of a major industrial economy. And if you don't think that, it's going to be hard to get the largest and most sophisticated businesses in Wisconsin to be your ally, if you don't think we need electric companies. So it's not that we're going to sweep them away. We're going to have them rebuild the airplane while they fly it. That's the technical problem. So let's not be flippant about how big a job we're asking the utilities to do. So I said I would mention what we accomplished in 20 weeks. I won't go through all this. Michael enumerated these accomplishments. This isn't really a word cloud. It looks like a word cloud. but we passed the solar energy standard. I'm actually proud that we asked for 10% requirement on all electric utilities by 2030. Some of our closest and dearest allies thought that was a little idealistic, but it's what got us at 1.5%. If we'd gone in and asked for 1.5%, we'd gotten 0.3. So I think we did get a goal in state law. Is the goal of the state of Minnesota that 10% of our electricity will be solar by 2030, and I believe we'll reach that goal. I believe we'll surpass it. Because when solar is cheaper than plain vanilla, who's not going to want solar if it's cheaper than plain vanilla? And it doesn't destroy the planet. Oh, I said I was only going to say that once. So we accomplished 1.5% solar by 2020. We accomplished this thing we talked about that we're going to enumerate all the incremental values of solar. It's valuable because it comes on peak. It's valuable because it's distributed. It's valuable because it strengthens the grid. It's valuable because it doesn't have CO2. It's valuable because, what am I missing? It doesn't need water, yeah. I'll tell you something about water. If the water that's going to support coal plants in Nebraska, which is in a very, very deep drought state, Nebraska, was spread across the state of Nebraska, it would be 1 inch deep. That's how much water goes in coal plants in Nebraska. So there's a lot of benefits to solar power. And we're going to try to enumerate the benefits. We have enumerated the benefits. We're going to try to get economists to agree on the economic value of those benefits. And then we're going to agree, hopefully, agree to pay the solar producers that, hopefully it'll be 12, 13, 14 cents a kilowatt hour. That's what I'm hoping. Pardon? Public health. Huge cost. So that's what we did. Oh, and community solar, let me say a little bit about community solar. I think you guys should think about community cow power. Why can't you use virtual net metering to have people in Dane County get credit on their own electric bill for the fact that their neighbor isn't stinking up the neighborhood, but instead is doing a biogas, biodigester thing? Wouldn't you be happy to get some of your power from your neighbor's cow power biogas farm? It's the same exact idea as community solar. The way the law is written is between 5 and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds or thousands of people. Some number of people would jointly own a solar project. It would be located any place it's sunny, and Excel said in this county or the neighboring county from where you live. And the 5 of us, Mike and the rest of the people in the front row, could all jointly own a solar project on your farm and get credit back on your own electric bill for your piece of the action. Because only 1 out of 5 people in Minnesota have a house that's properly situated to get solar power. So the other 4 people could have their solar investment at somebody else's house or in a field or in a farm or where it's sunny. I think it's probably the most popular thing we did politically, but now we're working out the details of how it'll actually work. And we did increase our net metering law from 40 kilowatts to a megawatt, which was contentious. The co-ops and munis are loading for bear to come back, crush us. All right, that's what we did in 20 weeks on solar power. Here's the end of my story. Brief comments about the big news on New Year's Eve when I don't know how many people saw the story in the paper that solar beats gas in Minnesota, a judge ruled. Okay, it's a small number, but what happened essentially is the Public Utilities Commission said that Xcel Energy needed some more peak power, and so Xcel Energy wanted a bid as replacing its coal plant at Black Dog with a gas plant they put at the same location. Because they were a bidder in a process they would also make the decision on, a law in Minnesota says that has to be decided by an independent judge. So an administrative law judge reviewed 3 gas plants and 100 megawatts of solar, each of them competing to meet peak demand. The solar plant won. So a lot has been written about it already. I blogged about it yesterday if you want to go to Fresh Energy's website and look at my blog post. What the judge said is the most, quote, most reasonable and prudent strategy for meeting this new demand is solar power. And then today, John Wellinghoff, who was the former chairman of the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, said, quote, it's certainly an indicator of things to come. So this 100 megawatts of solar, it's about $250 million worth of solar. It would increase the amount of solar in Minnesota by a factor of 7, just one deal. We have 15 megawatts like you have. This would be another 100 megawatts. So $250 million worth of solar. It's spread at 20 locations all around the state. Political support in 20 different counties. At the substations, no transmission required. And that's why it won the bid. It won the bid because it was a modest amount. It was the 100 megawatts that they bid was regarded as equal to 71 megawatts of dispatchable power. You know, solar's not dispatchable. So there's an accreditation. They said the 100 megawatts of solar was equal to 71 megawatts of dispatchable. So they had 71 megawatts of dispatchable power at 20 places, and it was cheaper than the gas plant. Because if you only run a gas plant between 4, 5, 6, 7% of the time, a peaker only runs on the hot summer days, it's really not cheap, it's expensive. So the solar bidder said, let's go with these guys and beat them at their own game. We'll put in a high capital cost, but no operating cost, and we'll go head-to-head against gas. So it's a landmark decision, but it's a model for you. You might need some peakers. You might need peak demand. In closing, Carl Rabago gave quite an inspiring speech at lunch. I was impressed that he actually wrote it out. He talked about military metaphors. The military metaphor I want to bring back is deployment. This is how we're going to win. We're going to deploy technology. We've deployed technology in wind power. We're going to deploy technology in solar power. Wisconsin's going to be the beneficiary of having very, very, very low-cost wind power because you're going to be buying these state-of-the-art new turbines. Wisconsin is going to be buying solar power at a tenth of the price of the solar power the Germans paid for. Everybody brags about Germany having, what is it, 30,000 megawatts of solar power? Is that the number? I mean, no, that's right. Germany has 30,000 megawatts of solar power. I mean, staggering amounts. But they paid way, 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 way more than Wisconsin can pay. Now, closing out, I have a Carleton College connection. Thorsten Veblen went to Carleton College, and he wrote a book in 1915, 100 years ago. He's an economist, sort of an offbeat economist. He wrote a book 100 years ago, in 1915. He lived in Nerstrand, Minnesota, about, 10 miles from campus, from Carleton College campus. And he said, Thorsten Veblen said, you're going to laugh at this, that there's an advantage in backwardness. There's a penalty to take the lead. Yeah. He wrote the book comparing the German economy and the English economy. And he said the Germans were so backwards that they would be able to leapfrog the English because they would be able to take all the innovations that have been developed by small businesses in England, and they would be able to adopt them by large businesses. They would be able to have the benefits of the lower cost, and the benefits of the mass production, the benefits of the learning, the benefits of not making all the mistakes. So when I struggle driving down here to think, now how am I going to be Debbie Downer and be up there like gloating, like, hey, man, all this cool stuff? I actually believe that you have the advantage in that you're behind. I believe you have a huge advantage in being behind. You haven't made any of the mistakes we made, and you can benefit from all the economies of scale and economies of mass production from the two cheapest technologies that are available, solar and wind. So, Carl threw out a little metaphor, a mission statement. I'm going to give you my own for you to consider. How about if Wisconsin was economically competitive? growing local industries, relying on indigenous resources, creating wealth, competing globally, creating an energy system that won't sell out the children of Wisconsin. How about if you make Wisconsin's energy system the energy of the world? How about if you make Wisconsin's energy system the envy of Minnesota?